Can you hurry? You are so slow. The tank has been open forever. My children
Mom,
are waiting.
the closed the same for everyone. It's near full already. Just give it a moment.
I have places to be faster.
August 15th, 2023. Maggie Thornton had been running from her past for 30 years. That Tuesday afternoon at Miller's gas station, it finally caught up. She stepped out of her BMW, saw a black man taking his time at pump 3, and felt something ugly rise in her chest. The words came fast and sharp. Some people have places to be. Deputy Marcus Williams turned around slowly. He knew that voice. He'd been waiting 15 years to hear it again. What happened in the next 4 minutes was recorded on 3 different phones. The footage went viral by midnight. CNN picked it up by morning. But the real story wasn't what the cameras caught. It was what Maggie whispered when she finally recognized his face, when she realized who his father was, when she understood that this wasn't an accident, the day her reckoning arrived wearing a badge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The heat rose off the asphalt in waves, distorting the air between them like a funhouse mirror. Maggie's hand trembled as she reached for her gas cap, muscle memory failing her after 30 years of avoiding stations like this one, the kind where she might run into people who remembered. Marcus Williams didn't move from pump 3. He stood there in his civilian clothes, off duty but never really off, watching her with the patience of a man who'd learned to wait for justice. His father had taught him that. Before the beating, before the wheelchair, before everything fell apart. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady as granite, "you seem to be in quite a hurry." The word ma'am hit Maggie like a slap, respectful, deliberate. The way Samuel Williams had addressed the judge during his civil rights case in 1993, when she'd stood beside him as his attorney, believing she could change the world one verdict at a time, before she learned that some battles cost more than winning was worth. She fumbled with the gas nozzle, her BMW's tank seeming impossibly small. Around them, the rural Georgia afternoon hummed with cicadas and the distant rumble of 18-wheelers on Highway 441. Miller's gas station squatted between cotton fields like a relic from another era, its paint chip sign advertising Coca-Cola and live bait. Maggie started, then stopped. What could she say? That seeing him triggered something primal and ugly she'd spent decades burying? That his presence at this forgotten station felt orchestrated, impossible? Marcus took a step closer, and she noticed the way he moved, controlled, deliberate. Like his father had moved in the courtroom, commanding respect through presence alone. But Samuel Williams was in a wheelchair now. Had been since the night 3 officers decided to teach him about knowing his place. The night Maggie had failed to get them convicted. "You know," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the humid air between them, "my daddy used to tell me about a lawyer he had once. Real smart woman, passionate. Said she fought like hell for what was right." Maggie's hand froze on the gas pump. The numbers on the display blurred. Said she had this way of talking in court that could make a jury believe anything. Even made him believe, for a while, that justice was colorblind. Marcus's laugh was soft, bitter. Funny thing about belief, though, it's got a way of dying when you need it most. The first phone appeared across the parking lot, a teenager filming from behind her mother's minivan, then another, held by an elderly man pretending to check his tire pressure. The invisible audience gathering, hungry for content, for drama, for the next viral moment to consume and discard. Maggie wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to drop the pump, climb into her BMW, and disappear back to her sanitized world of property listings and suburban isolation. But her feet wouldn't move. She was trapped in this moment like an insect in amber, 30 years of guilt crystallizing in the heat. "I don't know what you're talking about," she managed, but the words came out weak, unconvincing. Marcus smiled then, and it was his father's smile, the one Samuel had worn in those newspaper photos from the 60s, leading marches, organizing boycotts, believing in tomorrow, before tomorrow taught him better. "Margaret Thornton," he said quietly, like he was tasting her name. "Used to be Margaret Sullivan before you married that real estate developer, before you traded civil rights for property rights." The gas pump clicked off with a metallic finality. Maggie stared at the nozzle in her hand, seeing her reflection distorted in its chrome surface. When had she gotten so old? When had the fire in her eyes dimmed to ash? "Sammy Jr. They called me back then," Marcus continued. "Too young to understand why Daddy came home with his face split open, why Mama cried when the jury said not guilty, Why our fancy lawyer just disappeared after that. I did everything I could. Did you? The question hung between them like smoke. Or did you do everything that was safe? Everything that wouldn't cost you anything that mattered? Across the station, more phones emerged, the audience growing, sensing blood in the water. In a few hours, this moment would be compressed into a bite-sized clip, stripped of context, fed to the algorithm's hunger for outrage. But right now, in the suffocating heat of a Georgia afternoon, it was just two people carrying the weight of old wounds. Maggie replaced the gas nozzle with shaking hands. She could feel Marcus watching her every movement, cataloging her fear, her shame, her desperate desire to escape. But there would be no escape this time. No quiet exit, no convenient excuse to disappear. Why? She whispered, finally meeting his eyes. Why now? Marcus reached into his back pocket, and Maggie's heart stopped. But instead of whatever she'd feared, he pulled out a thin leather wallet, flipped it open to reveal a sheriff's deputy badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. Because, he said, it's time. The badge caught the late afternoon light like a mirror, throwing fractured reflections across Maggie's face. She stared at the star-shaped metal, its surface polished to perfection, and felt something inside her chest crack open. Not her heart, but something deeper. The careful architecture of denial she'd built over 15 years, brick by brick, excuse by excuse. Deputy Marcus Williams, the son of the man she'd failed to save. The irony tasted like copper in her mouth. All these years, she'd imagined him following his father's path, maybe teaching, maybe organizing, definitely fighting the good fight she'd abandoned. Instead, he'd joined the system, become part of the machine that had broken Samuel Williams' spine and spirit in equal measure. "You're a cop," she said, the words scraping her throat raw. "Deputy Sheriff," Marcus corrected, snapping the wallet closed with practiced precision. 15 years next month. Started right here in Whitmore County, worked my way up. Amazing what they'll let you do when you're willing to play by their rules. The emphasis on "there" hit like a physical blow. Maggie glanced around the gas station, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. The phones were still recording, but the distance muffled their conversation into background noise. For now. "I need to go," she whispered, fumbling for her car door handle. "Where to?" Marcus asked, and his voice carried the easy authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Back to Magnolia Hills subdivision? That new development with the golf course and the gates? Must be nice living somewhere so protected." He knew where she lived. The realization sent ice water through her veins despite the Georgia heat. This wasn't chance. This was planned, orchestrated, inevitable. "Back to that big house on Peachtree Court?" Marcus continued, circling closer like a predator sensing weakness. "The one with the 3-car garage and the swimming pool? Must get lonely, though, especially since your husband passed. What's it been now, 3 years?" "Stop." The word came out sharp, desperate. Robert's death was still too fresh, too raw. The heart attack that had taken him while she was showing $1 million listing to clients who'd never buy. Coming home to find him collapsed in his study, surrounded by architectural plans for their next development project, the one that would pave over the old Williams family land. Another irony in a life suddenly full of them. Marcus must have seen something in her face, because his expression softened, just slightly. For a moment, she glimpsed the boy he'd been, Sammy Jr., hiding behind his mother's skirt while his father limped home from another beating, another arrest, another day of trying to change a world that refused to budge. "I'm sorry about Robert," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made it worse somehow. "Cancer, wasn't it? No, heart attack. I remember now, made the papers. Local developer dies suddenly." They mentioned his wife, the former civil rights attorney. Funny how they always lead with the former part. Maggie's hand finally found the door handle, cool metal against her palm. "What do you want from me?" "Want?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Lady, what I wanted was my father walking down the aisle at my wedding. What I wanted was him teaching my son to ride a bicycle. What I wanted was justice for 3 cops who put a good man in a wheelchair for the crime of believing in tomorrow." The words hung between them like a noose. Maggie remembered the wedding announcement in the paper. She'd seen it years ago, had felt a strange mixture of relief and guilt that Samuel Williams' son was building a life despite everything. She'd even started to write a congratulations card before stopping, realizing she had no right to intrude on their happiness. "I tried," she said weakly. The case was winnable. Marcus's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, forcing her to lean closer. We both know it. You had witnesses. You had evidence. You had 3 cops with histories of excessive force and a victim who'd never so much as jaywalked. The jury would have convicted if their lawyer hadn't quit mid-trial. The words came out measured, controlled, each one chosen for maximum impact. If she hadn't suddenly developed doubts about her client's testimony, if she hadn't spent the last week of trial going through the motions like she was already planning her exit strategy. The accusation hit home because it was true, every word. Maggie closed her eyes, but the memories came anyway. Sitting in her office at 2 a.m., reading the death threats that had started arriving after she'd taken Samuel's case. Finding her car vandalized. Watching her teenage daughter Emma grow thin and nervous, jumping at every sound. And then the final straw. Emma coming home from school with a black eye, courtesy of classmates whose fathers thought Maggie needed to learn her place. The final straw. Even now, 15 years later, Maggie could feel Emma's tears soaking through her blouse as her daughter collapsed in the foyer, backpack spilling homework across marble floors that suddenly felt cold as a morgue. 17 years old and already broken by the choices her mother had made in the name of justice. They said things, Emma had whispered against her shoulder, about you, about Daddy, about what happens to families who don't know their place. That night, Maggie had made her choice, not consciously, not all at once, but in the way that drowning happens, slowly, then all at once, until you're gasping for air that tastes like surrender. Emma, she said now, the name escaping before she could stop it. Marcus tilted his head, studying her with those eyes that missed nothing. Your daughter. Heard she died in that car accident. Drunk driver, wasn't it? 2 years after Daddy's trial ended. The words hit like a physical blow. Maggie's knees nearly buckled, her hand clutching the BMW's doorframe for support. Emma. Beautiful, brilliant Emma who'd wanted to be a teacher, who'd volunteered at the animal shelter, who'd forgiven her mother for choosing safety over justice even as it poisoned everything between them. Don't the word came out broken, barely human? She was driving to see you, Marcus continued, relentless now. Coming home from college for the weekend. Funny thing, she'd started volunteering with some civil rights organizations up at UGA, trying to finish what her mama started maybe, trying to make sense of why you walked away from everything you'd taught her to believe in. Maggie felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, like a bone breaking in a place she'd forgotten existed. Emma had been coming home to tell her about the volunteer work. She'd left 3 voicemails that Friday afternoon, excitement bubbling in her voice as she talked about voter registration drives and community organizing. Voicemails Maggie had been too busy showing houses to suburban families to return. You did your research, she managed, each word feeling like glass. Had to. Marcus pulled something else from his pocket, not his badge this time, but his phone. The screen was black, but Maggie could see herself reflected in it, distorted and small. See, funny thing happened last month. My daddy, he started talking about you again, first time in years. Kept asking if I'd ever looked you up, ever wondered what happened to the lawyer who'd fought so hard and then just stopped fighting. The phone screen flickered to life. Marcus's thumb moved across the surface with practiced ease, pulling up what looked like a voice recording app. A red dot indicated it was already running. He's in hospice now, Marcus said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. Complications from being paralyzed for 30 years. Bed sores that won't heal, infections, the kind of slow death they don't show in movies about civil rights heroes. Maggie's vision blurred. Samuel Williams dying alone while his son confronted the woman who'd abandoned him when he needed her most. The symmetry was brutal, perfect. Last week, he asked me to find you. Said he had something to tell you before. Marcus gestured vaguely, but the meaning was clear. Said it was important, about the night he got beaten, about what really happened. I know what happened. Do you? The question cut through her words like a blade, because there's something he never told you, something he couldn't tell you, not with everything else falling apart. Something about why those 3 cops were so sure they could get away with what they did. The gas station seemed to tilt around them. Maggie felt gravity shift, felt the earth move beneath her feet in ways that had nothing to do with physics and everything to do with the careful lies she'd built her life around. What are you talking about? Marcus's smile was his father's smile, but sharper now, hungrier. Someone told them you were planning to drop the case. 2 days before they put him in the hospital. Someone called the station house and said Margaret Thornton was looking for an excuse to walk away, that all they needed to do was give her one. The words hit like a freight train. Maggie stared at him, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly as her mind raced through the implications. Someone had known she was wavering. Someone had known exactly which pressure points to hit to make her break. Someone had used her weakness as a weapon against Samuel Williams. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Is it?" Marcus held up his phone, the recording app still running, still capturing every word. "Because Daddy's been thinking about it for 30 years. About who knew how scared you were getting, who knew about the threats, who had enough pull with the cops to make that kind of call." He leaned closer, and she could smell his aftershave, could see the gold wedding band on his finger, could feel the weight of 3 decades pressing down on this moment like a physical thing. "He thinks he knows who it was," Marcus said quietly. "And Margaret, he wants to tell you before he dies." The phone fell from Marcus's hand, clattering against the concrete with a sound like breaking bones. Neither of them moved to retrieve it, both frozen in the aftermath of his words. The recording app glowed red between them, still running, still hungry for confession. "You're lying," Maggie whispered. But even as she said it, she felt the foundation of her carefully constructed reality beginning to crack. 30 years of guilt. 30 years of telling herself she'd simply been too weak, too scared, too human to see justice through. But this suggested something far worse than cowardice: betrayal. Marcus watched her with clinical precision, cataloging every micro-expression, every tell. The cop and him reading her like evidence. "Am I? Think about it, Margaret. Really think. Who knew you were getting those death threats? Who knew about Emma's black eye? Who knew exactly how close you were to breaking?" The questions hit like hammer blows. Maggie's mind raced backward through time, through memories she'd spent decades trying to bury. The inner circle had been so small, just her, Robert, and... No. The word escaped before she could stop it. "Your law partner," Marcus said, his voice gentle now, almost pitying. "Theodore Jameson, good old Teddy, the one who suggested you take Samuel's case in the first place, the one who stood beside you at press conferences talking about justice and equality, the one who comforted you when the threats started coming." Maggie's knees gave out. She slumped against her BMW, the metal burning hot against her back even through her blazer. Theodore, Teddy, who'd been her mentor, her friend, practically family, who'd walked her down the aisle when her own father refused to attend her wedding to a race trader, who'd held her while she cried after Emma's funeral. "You don't understand," she managed. "Teddy would never..." Wouldn't he? Marcus bent down, retrieving his phone with deliberate care. "See, that's the beauty of it. He didn't have to tell them to hurt Samuel. He just had to let them know that you were about to quit anyway. That all they needed to do was give you a good enough reason to walk away with your conscience intact." The words landed like physical blows. Maggie saw it all now, the careful orchestration she'd been too traumatized to recognize at the time. How the beating had come at precisely the right moment, after she'd confided her fears to Teddy, after she'd admitted she was thinking of withdrawing from the case, but before she'd actually done it. It had given her the perfect excuse. Samuel Williams, beaten unconscious in a jail cell, permanently paralyzed, no longer able to testify effectively on his own behalf. The case had fallen apart not because she was a coward, but because she no longer had a credible client. Except now Marcus was suggesting it had all been orchestrated, that her mentor, her friend, her surrogate father had used her own weakness as a weapon against the very people she'd been trying to help. "Why?" she breathed. "Money," Marcus said simply. "Always money. You remember who bought the Williams family land after Daddy lost everything paying medical bills? Who developed it into that strip mall out on Highway 9? Maggie's vision grayed at the edges. She remembered the development, had driven past it countless times over the years without making the connection. Jameson Properties. Teddy's side business, the one that had made him rich enough to retire early, rich enough to buy that mansion on the lake. Teddy knew that if Samuel won his case, if those cops got convicted, it would send a message, Marcus continued. Might inspire other folks to stand up, to fight back. Might make it harder for certain people to acquire certain pieces of land at rock-bottom prices. The betrayal cut deeper than anything Maggie had ever experienced. Worse than Robert's death, worse than Emma's accident, worse than 30 years of self-hatred. Because this meant she'd been right to fight, right to believe, right to risk everything for justice, and the man she trusted most had used that righteousness to destroy everything she touched. "Where is he now?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Marcus smiled, and this time it held no warmth at all. "That's the thing, Margaret. Theodore Jameson isn't just my daddy's theory about what happened 30 years ago. He's also the reason I'm standing here today." Maggie's blood turned to ice. "What do you mean?" "I mean, old Teddy's been busy. Real busy. Seems he's got his eye on some new property. Prime real estate, perfect for development. Only problem is, there's an old man in a hospice bed who still owns the mineral rights. An old man who might decide to get chatty about ancient history before he dies." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. This wasn't about the past at all. This was about the present, about another betrayal in progress. About Teddy moving to tie up loose ends before Samuel Williams could tell his story. "He sent you," Maggie whispered. Marcus's silence was answer enough. The recording app on Marcus's phone glowed like a malevolent eye, capturing her ragged breathing, her whispered accusations, every word that could destroy what remained of her carefully constructed life. But none of that mattered now because the truth was finally crawling out of its grave, 30 years of decay and lies spilling across the sun-baked concrete. "He didn't send me to hurt you," Marcus said, and the gentleness in his voice was somehow worse than cruelty would have been. "He sent me to protect himself. See, Teddy's got a problem. My daddy's been asking questions, making calls, even from that hospice bed, even with his body failing, he's been digging. And when a dying man starts talking about police corruption and land deals from 3 decades ago, people listen," Maggie finished, her voice hollow. "People listen." Marcus pocketed his phone, but she knew the damage was already done. Every word they'd spoken was preserved now, evidence in a case she didn't even understand yet. Especially when that dying man happens to be Samuel Williams, civil rights legend, the man who took a beating that should have killed him and lived to tell about it. The irony tasted like blood. Samuel Williams had become more powerful in defeat than he'd ever been in victory. His broken body had become a symbol, his silence a form of testimony that had inspired a generation of activists. And now, as he lay dying, that same symbolic power threatened to destroy the man who'd orchestrated his destruction. So Teddy sent his pet deputy to what? Silence him? Maggie's laugh came out broken, bitter. Send his tame black cop to intimidate the family he destroyed? Marcus's jaw tightened, the first crack in his professional composure. Pet? Tame? The words came out low, dangerous. "Lady, you don't know anything about what I am or why I'm here." "Don't I?" Something wild was rising in Maggie's chest, a recklessness born of having nothing left to lose. "You're here doing Teddy's dirty work, just like—" The words died in her throat as Marcus stepped closer, and for the first time she saw past the badge, past the uniform, past the careful control. She saw rage, pure, distilled, 30 years in the making. "Just like what, Margaret? Just like you did his dirty work? Just like you let him use your conscience as cover for his schemes?" His voice dropped to a whisper that cut deeper than shouting. "At least I know who I'm working for." The accusation hit home because it was true. She'd been Teddy's unwitting accomplice, his useful idiot, the righteous face on his corrupt enterprise. How many other cases had she handled without seeing the bigger picture? How many other families had paid the price for her blindness? "I didn't know," she said weakly. "Didn't want to know," Marcus corrected. "There's a difference. You want to know what I think? I think part of you suspected something was wrong even then, but it was easier to blame yourself, easier to carry 30 years of guilt, than to face the truth about someone you trusted." He was right. God help her, he was right. There had been signs. Teddy's too convenient acquisition of the Williams land, his sudden wealth after a career of pro bono work, the way he'd guided her away from certain lines of inquiry during the case. But she'd been so focused on her own pain, her own loss, that she'd never connected the dots. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "If you're working for him—" "I never said I was working for him." Marcus's smile was sharp as broken glass. "I said he sent me. There's a difference." Maggie felt the world shift again, pieces of the puzzle rearranging themselves into a pattern she couldn't quite see yet. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when Teddy Jameson called my captain 3 weeks ago, asking for a discreet officer to check on an old family friend who might be confused about past events, he made a mistake. Marcus pulled out his phone again, swiping to a different app. He assumed that a black deputy sheriff would automatically be loyal to the white power structure that pays his salary. He assumed I'd forgotten where I came from. The phone screen showed a text conversation. Maggie caught fragments, meeting times, instructions, references to keeping the old man quiet and managing the situation. The messages were from a number listed as T. Jameson. He wanted me to intimidate my own father, Marcus said, his voice thick with disgust. Wanted me to use my badge to silence a dying man who'd already lost everything. Can you imagine asking a son to be the instrument of his father's final humiliation? Maggie's vision blurred. The scope of Teddy's corruption was staggering, but this was personal cruelty on a scale that defied understanding. To ask Marcus to participate in his own father's destruction, to use his badge as a weapon against his own family. So what are you going to do? She whispered. Marcus's smile was his father's smile now, full of quiet strength and unshakable purpose. I'm going to do what you should have done 30 years ago, Margaret. I'm going to see this through to the end. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, vibrating with unspoken possibilities. Maggie's mind raced, trying to process the implications of Marcus's words. If he wasn't working for Teddy, if this confrontation wasn't orchestrated by her former mentor, then what was it? You planned this, she said slowly, the realization dawning like a cold sunrise. You've been watching me. Marcus nodded, no shame in his expression. For weeks, learning your routines, your routes. You take Highway 441 to show properties in Madison County every Thursday. Always stop at this gas station on the way back. Always use pump 6 because it's closest to the road. The methodical nature of his surveillance should have frightened her, but instead, Maggie felt a strange sense of relief. After 30 years of random guilt, of believing herself a coward who'd simply cracked under pressure, there was something almost comforting about discovering she'd been a target all along. Your father doesn't know you're here, she said. No. Marcus's voice carried a weight of private anguish. Daddy still believes in justice through proper channels, still thinks the system can work if you just push hard enough, wait long enough, believe long enough. He laughed bitterly. 30 years in a wheelchair, and he still has more faith than I do. So why? Because I've been carrying this my whole life. The words exploded out of him with surprising force. Growing up as the son of Samuel Williams, the boy whose father was martyred for civil rights. You know what that's like? Having everyone expect you to be grateful for his sacrifice? Having people tell you how proud you must be? Maggie saw it then, the burden she'd never considered. While she'd been drowning in guilt, Marcus had been suffocating under the weight of inherited heroism, forced to smile when people praised his father's courage while knowing the truth about why that courage had been necessary. I joined the force to understand them, Marcus continued. To get inside their world, to see how they think, how they operate. And you know what I learned? Most of them aren't evil, they're just weak. They follow orders, protect their own, and tell themselves it's for the greater good, like me. Like you. He studied her with those penetrating eyes. But weakness isn't the same as malice, and ignorance isn't the same as intent. Maggie felt something shifting in her chest, a loosening she hadn't experienced in decades. You're giving me an out. I'm giving you a choice. Marcus stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, his father's eyes. The same choice you should have had 30 years ago, before Teddy Jameson poisoned the well, which is, help me finish what you started. Help me get justice for my father, real justice this time. Not just for the beating, but for everything that came after. The stolen land, the destroyed lives, the 30 years of silence. The proposition hung in the air between them like a challenge. Maggie felt the familiar fear rising, the same terror that had paralyzed her all those years ago. But underneath it, something else stirred, something she'd thought was dead and buried with Emma, righteous anger. Teddy will destroy me, she said. He's got connections, influence. He'll make sure I lose everything. Marcus's smile was predatory. What's left to lose? Your real estate license? Your house? Your reputation? He gestured at her BMW, her expensive clothes, the carefully maintained facade of suburban success. This isn't a life, Margaret. This is just an elaborate form of hiding. The words hit like a slap because they were true. She'd spent 15 years building a prison of respectability, surrounding herself with material comfort to muffle the screams of her conscience. But Emma was still dead, Samuel Williams was still paralyzed, and Teddy Jameson was still out there, still manipulating, still destroying lives for profit. "He used me," she whispered, and for the first time, the words carried conviction instead of just pain. "He used all of us." Marcus pulled out a business card, not his deputy's card, but something else, personal. "My father's address. He's at Peaceful Meadows Hospice on Elm Street, room 247. Maggie took the card with trembling fingers. "What am I supposed to say to him?" "Start with the truth. Tell him you're sorry. Tell him you were afraid. Tell him you wish you'd been stronger." Marcus's voice gentled. "And then ask him to tell you what he knows about Theodore Jameson's current business dealings." Current dealings? The mineral rights to his old property? They're about to become very valuable. Seems there might be a natural gas deposit under that strip mall. Enough to make certain people very, very rich. The final piece clicked into place with devastating clarity. This wasn't about the past at all. It was about the present. Teddy was still playing the same game, still manipulating events from behind the scenes, still using other people's weakness as weapons. But this time, he'd miscalculated. This time, he'd sent the wrong deputy to silence the wrong family. "Room 247, Maggie repeated, tucking the card into her blazer pocket.